Hey guys, GWS here. Just got done with one video and I just figured I just had to comment on something. I kind of want to stay away from politics, but it just stuff keeps bringing me into it. And now that I kind of got stuff being uploaded to my channel again, I just figure I just got to comment on this. And I have Steven Crowder's video up here, but this is just in general to the type of treatment that Tulsi Gabbard has gotten from the Democrats. And just to kind of lay some groundwork here, as I make sure my audio is working, I just want people to understand I support Trump. I don't support Tulsi Gabbard's specific policies, but there is one thing that I love about Tulsi Gabbard, and this is why I overall support her, and she's the only Democrat I genuinely support, and that is just her overwhelming character. She is real. She's real in a way few other politicians are, at least on certain things. Like, there's undoubtedly some political influence there, some career aspirations. But the one thing you got to understand is when you hear Tulsi Gabbard talk about war, you could see it in her that it has a weight to her. Now, through like her political training and experience, etc., being in Hawaii politics and being in Congress, it's not as evident, but you can tell that foreign policy has a weight on her mind unlike anything else. And this is where her bread and butter is. She is a progressive on domestic policies. I'm not, but I like her character. That being said, the way she's been treated by the media from day one, by the way, this didn't just come up with Steven Crowder or with Hillary Clinton calling her a Russian asset. No, this has been since day one. The media has treated her like garbage. I'm talking about how the Russians want her to win. Just because she is less interventionist than most Democrats are, than the media is. And, you know, let me explain something about the media. The media is out for ratings. The media, CNN, MSNBC, ABC, CBS, etc., they are corporate entities. They are out to make a profit. How does the profit, or how does the media make a profit? Ratings. What is the number one thing that produces ratings? Current events. Because when there's large current events, people need to know. They need to watch the news. And what's the number one thing in the news that people are going to watch? War. We all know this. We all know they're chasing ratings. So what do? Anytime there is a war, no matter who it is, even when Trump does it, even Orange Man bad, Trump could never do anything right. 93% negative coverage in the media. Even when Donald Trump does it, the media will sit there and talk about, like Chris Cuomo, Fredo, how the missiles that we launch at Syria look so beautiful. How you could see the glistening fire under the missiles, and just how that was the most sickening thing I've ever heard when Trump bombed a Syrian airbase. Like, just talking so casually about war. As if war is like, a, a dang camping trip. Like, it is so unbelievable what the media will do. And then when people like Tulsi Gabbard say, or Bernie Sanders, maybe we ought to cut down on the wars. Maybe we ought to let people solve their own problems for once. All of a sudden, oh, they're a Russian agent. They're a Russian asset. WikiLeaks is a Russian asset because they report on U.S. interventionist policies. Um, you know, it's just so unbelievable how she's been treated. She's been to Iraq. She was a medic, and that actually puts her probably in the worst position of all because um, it's like, I don't want to speak for a veteran because I'm not one, but like when you're in war, you're in the moment. And that's one of the big things. Like, you are experiencing that, and that's your experience. Like later on in life, you're going to carry that for the rest of your life, and that's why anybody who serves, no matter what role, is amazing to me. But it gets even worse in a sense in the mental aspect when you're a medic and you see all these soldiers coming in with limbs blown off or disfigured, mutilated, yet they're alive, and you could see the agony that they feel. That would be so difficult. That was her job there. She actually served. In fact, I don't think um, there may have been one. I think Buttigieg might have served, but there's only been a couple, if there's any, of the Democrats who did serve. Um, and it's just for them to just talk casually about war, like, oh, how we got to help our Kurdish allies and all. It's I support the Kurds, but it's like you got to get out of the wars. That's the problem because, see, here's the thing. Um, the UN is a thing. International law is a thing. We had something um, in between it was 1917 and 1938 called the League of Nations. The League of Nations did not have the United States supporting. In fact, we couldn't even ratify it. Um, and because of that, the League of Nations became useless because there was no major superpower to mediate anything. All there was Europeans, and it's like with Europeans, you had a big conflict because they had colonization in Africa. You had the United Kingdom, which still owned large parts of Africa at the time. You had France, which still owned large parts of Africa at the time. So then you get the Italians saying, you know, we had this claim in the late 1800s over Abyssinia, now known as Ethiopia, and we want this. We want this. We want to take our claim. And then the League of Nations goes, hold on, you can't just go invading land. And then it's like they're pointing the finger, like, no, look at all these holdings you have. And see, when you have, like, countries saying one thing and then doing another, and then you don't have major powerful advocates of actual international law, guess what? That entity becomes useless, and that's why the League of Nations fell apart in 1938. So, then you have the UN that comes along, and then we finally get the UN ratified through Congress, which is great. But see, there's a problem. The United States, we've never really abided by international law, unless the UN hasn't ever been that great. But what we had in the past was an agreement between the USA and the USSR, and we had a certain set of rules, and a lot of that was reflected in the UN. Like stuff like nuclear proliferation. So the UN was a mixed bag during the Cold War because you had additional motives. We had some violations of international law, but we also had a lot of areas where we cooperated, and that encouraged other nations to cooperate. See, today, after the USSR's collapse, we don't have that Cold War anymore. So what happened? The United States especially after Bill Clinton, during George W. Bush, just said, screw international law. We're going to invade Iraq. We're going to bring our NATO allies along, invoking Article 5, which is another whole can of worms I'm not going to get into. But you know, we're gonna violate international law by invading a sovereign country that did not attack us, that is no threat to our national security, that didn't even do 9/11. Like Iraq was just Saddam Hussein, who had nothing to do with it. Those were Saudis, etc. But that's another topic entirely, Saudi Arabia. Anyhow, my point is that us violating international law through this neocon idea that we're supposed to invade every country that we consider quote unquote evil and protect people that we consider quote unquote good, and expecting this to ever manifest in anything other than destabilizing the entire region by putting in people, we all said we're good, but then turned out to be not good. It hasn't worked. The UN, we have screwed up the UN so much through our repeated violations of international law that other countries don't even care. Russia invading Crimea, it doesn't even matter. It does not matter that the UN specifically, in the border agreement, specifically says Crimea is Ukraine. That was not disputed. And then Russia takes it over. And then, like, when we say, hey, what about international law here? And then it's like, we get the finger pointed at us for our violations. And this is the important thing: actions have consequences. When you violate international law repeatedly, as we did with Iraq, as we did with Syria, as we've done with repeatedly bombing other nations just in the name of quote unquote terrorism, we have made the UN a joke. And the UN is a joke, as people who defend the Kurds quickly point out. But it's like, why is the UN a joke? It's because we are not an advocate. The United States does not advocate for international law. We cherry pick. We'll use international law when it benefits us, but when it doesn't benefit us, we're not going by it. We're doing our own thing. So the way the Big Five looks at it, especially China and Russia, is like, why should we abide by international law when you refuse to do so? We need to be an advocate for international law. It is the only way that things are going to remain stable. We need to be an advocate. We need to be the strongest advocate of international law, not just an advocate. We need to be able to do things and to accept outcomes that don't particularly align with our interests. Like, okay, Assad is going to remain in power in Syria. That's going to happen. And you know what? That is okay. That doesn't mean remain in Syria. That doesn't mean make up some excuse like we're protecting the Kurds or we're defending against genocide or whatever fake news type of deal you want to support. No. It means learn to accept outcomes that do not benefit us, and when we go to war, we need to stop violating international law even when we're going to war. We need to stop selling white phosphorus to Saudi Arabia and Israel, and any other countries that are using it as a chemical agent. And I even just vouch for banning white phosphorus, period. If you need a smoke screen, just don't use white phosphorus, because there's too much of that legal gray area. But anyhow, that's yet another legal argument that we're not going to get into. But it's indisputable that you cannot use white phosphorus for its chemical properties. It is a smoke screen, and when you use it as a chemical agent, you are using chemical weapons, and that is against international law. And we need to understand that and stop selling it to people. Stop using it. If there are instances where we're using it, I won't. you know, let's just say we don't abide by international law anywhere else, so there's no reason to doubt that we would use it, whether or not we have. And we need to just stop using the Middle East as a chessboard. If we need oil, we have more than enough oil in this country on our own. And there's more than just the Middle East for oil nowadays. Nowadays, Canada produces a lot, Russia produces a lot, South America produces a lot, Southeast Asia produces a decent amount. Like, you can get oil anywhere now. It's not just the Middle East. This whole OPEC stuff doesn't apply like it did in the 1990s. We can, supply ourselves, and we can look for alternative sources of supply. And that's the big thing. But anyhow, the point I'm making is the long drawn out point. Tulsi Gabbard is right on foreign policy. And Bernie Sanders would be right, except for he went with the establishment angle that we need to keep people in there to protect the Kurds. It's like that's not our fight. They've been fighting for hundreds of years. That's not our fight, and there's not a genocide going on, just like there wasn't a genocide going on before we went there. Turkey's goal is a buffer zone. Even if Turkey got everything it wanted, it wouldn't invade all of northern Syria, and it even couldn't because that'd mean all out war with Assad. But whatever they work out needs to be between them, Syria, and the Kurds. And, you know, I think they're very capable of working with one another or working through the UN, which should be better. And see, once we become an advocate for the UN and an advocate for international law, that and only that is the point where we can start having political influence without having to just send troops everywhere and having to babysit and do all this other stupid stuff that's costing us billions, sometimes trillions of dollars. Yeah, we we need to get on board with the international community. Stop playing rogue state. Tulsi Gabbard's right. It's not being a Russian puppet to say we ought to not be so interventionist. And that's that. So, anyhow, I'll be back for more content. Thanks for listening, guys. God bless. And I will be back later on.